I'll never forget the day I looked at myself in the mirror and realized I was the problem. Not the economy, not my boss, not my circumstances. Me. I was 25 years old, broke, with nothing to show for my life but excuses and a handful of broken promises I'd made to myself. And here's what hit me that day. Standing there in that tiny apartment I could barely afford, I had become comfortable with my own mediocrity. I had settled. And that comfort, that settling, that was killing me slowly, one wasted day at a time. Let me tell you something about comfort. It's the most dangerous place you can ever find yourself. When you're comfortable, you stop growing. When you're comfortable, you stop asking the hard questions. When you're comfortable, you think you've arrived, but really you've just stopped moving. And I was there, stuck in that place where I'd convinced myself that this was just how life was going to be for me. I had all these stories I'd tell myself. I didn't have the right education. I didn't come from the right family. I didn't have the right connections. Story after story after story, and every single one of them was keeping me exactly where I was. Here's the truth that changed everything for me. Breaking yourself isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you have to choose to do. See, life will break you eventually if you let it. Circumstances will wear you down. Disappointments will pile up. Time will pass. And before you know it, you're 50, 60, 70 years old, wondering where it all went. But that's breaking by default. That's letting life do to you what life does. What I'm talking about is different. I'm talking about looking at yourself with clear eyes and saying, this version of me isn't going to get me where I want to go. This version of me needs to be torn down so I can build something better. Most people never do this. They never make that choice. They wait for the crisis. They wait for the heart attack, the divorce, the bankruptcy, the moment when life forces them to change. And by then they're so beaten down that they don't have the energy to rebuild properly. They just patch themselves up and go right back to being who they were. But when you break yourself on purpose, when you choose to dismantle the old you before life does it for you, that's when real transformation becomes possible. I remember sitting down one evening with a pad of paper, and I started writing down everything that was wrong with my life. My finances were a disaster. My health was declining. My relationships were shallow. My mind was filled with garbage because I wasn't reading anything worthwhile. My days had no structure, no purpose, no direction. And as I'm writing this list, I realized something profound. Every single item on that list was a direct result of who I had become. My outer world was a perfect reflection of my inner world. The mess around me was nothing compared to the mess inside me. Here's what I learned. You can't change your life until you change yourself. And you can't change yourself until you're willing to admit that the current version of you is the reason you're stuck. That's a hard pill to swallow. Nobody wants to look in the mirror and say, I'm the problem. We'd much rather blame the government, blame the economy, blame our parents, blame our spouse, blame anybody but ourselves. But until you take full responsibility for who you've become, you'll never have the power to become someone different. The old me had beliefs that were holding me back, and I didn't even know it. I believed that money was hard to come by. I believed that successful people were just lucky or had advantages I didn't have. I believed that reading books was something other people did, not me. Every one of these beliefs was like a chain around my neck, and I had put them there myself. Nobody forced me to think these things. I had picked them up along the way from people who didn't know any better, and I had accepted them as truth. You see, the breaking process starts with breaking your beliefs. You've got to examine everything you think you know and ask yourself, is this actually true, or is this just something I've been telling myself? Most of what we believe isn't based on facts. It's based on opinions, on hearsay, on what we heard somebody say one time. And we build our entire lives on these shaky foundations, and then we wonder why everything keeps falling apart. I had to break my belief that I was stuck. I had to break my belief that change was too hard. I had to break my belief that I was too old, too young, too uneducated, too whatever. Every excuse I had been using had to be examined and destroyed. And let me tell you, that process hurts. It hurts to admit you've been wrong. It hurts to realize you've wasted years believing things that weren't true. It hurts to look at all the opportunities you missed because you were too afraid or too convinced you couldn't do it. But here's the beautiful part. Once you start breaking these false beliefs, once you start tearing down these mental barriers you've built for yourself, you start to see possibilities you never saw before. It's like you've been living in a dark room your whole life, and suddenly someone turns on a light. You realize the room is bigger than you thought. The ceiling is higher than you thought. There are doors you never knew existed. I started to understand that my life up to that point had been lived by default, not by design. I was just reacting to whatever came my way. I wasn't choosing my direction. I wasn't setting goals. I wasn't creating a philosophy for my life. I was just drifting. And wherever the current took me, that's where I ended up. And the current, let me tell you, it doesn't take you anywhere good. The current takes you downstream to the easy place, to the comfortable place, to the place where everybody else ends up who isn't rowing their own boat. So I made a decision. I decided that the comfortable me had to die. The lazy me had to die. Not because I hated myself, but because I loved my future more than I loved my comfort. I loved the possibilities more than I loved the familiarity. And that's what it takes. You've got to want the new version of yourself more than you want to stay the same. The breaking process isn't about self-destruction, it's about self-renovation. You know how sometimes you see an old building and it's got good bones, but it's falling apart? And someone comes in and guts the whole thing, tears out all the old wiring, all the old plumbing, strips it down to the foundation, and then rebuilds it into something magnificent. That's what we're talking about here. You've got good bones, you've got potential. But all the old wiring, all the old systems you've been running on, they're not going to get you where you want to go. I had to break my old routine. I used to sleep until the last possible minute, rush through my morning, show up to work unprepared, spend my lunch hour complaining with other complainers, come home tired, watch television till I fell asleep, and then do it all over again. That routine was killing my future. Every single day of that routine was a day I wasn't becoming better, so I broke it. I started getting up earlier. I started reading in the morning. I started planning my day instead of just letting it happen to me. And let me tell you, my old self fought against these changes with everything it had. Your old self will fight you. It will tell you that you don't need to change this much. It will tell you that you're fine the way you are. It will tell you that all this effort isn't worth it. It will remind you how comfortable things used to be. It will make you feel guilty for wanting more. It will do everything in its power to pull you back to who you were, because that's what it knows. Your old self is terrified of dying, and it should be, because that's exactly what needs to happen. Here's something else I discovered. You can't pour new wine into old wineskins. You can't build a new life using your old thinking. You can't achieve new results with old habits. The container has to change. The vessel has to change. You have to change at such a fundamental level that when you look back a year from now, 5 years from now, you barely recognize who you used to be. And that's not a tragedy. That's the whole point. Now let me talk to you about what this breaking process actually looks like, because it's not pretty, and I won't lie to you about that. When I decided to really examine my life, when I decided to face the truth about myself, without any excuses, without any sugarcoating, it was one of the most painful things I've ever done. You think you know yourself, but you don't. Not really. We spend so much time avoiding the hard truths about ourselves that when we finally sit down and face them, it's like meeting a stranger we don't particularly like. I started by looking at my finances, and what I saw disgusted me. Here I was, a grown man, and I couldn't account for where my money went. I was making excuses about not earning enough, but the truth was I was spending everything I made on things that didn't matter. Coffee here, lunch there, impulse purchases everywhere. I was living like tomorrow would never come, and then I was surprised when tomorrow came and I had nothing. The first step in breaking myself was admitting that I was financially illiterate. I didn't know how to manage money because I'd never bothered to learn. That was a hard truth to swallow. Then I looked at my relationships, and that was even worse. I had surrounded myself with people who were going nowhere, and we were all helping each other stay comfortable in our mediocrity. We'd sit around and complain about our bosses, complain about the government, complain about how unfair life was. We were like a support group for failure, and I was the president. I realized that I didn't have a single friend who was doing better than me, who was challenging me to grow, who was setting an example I wanted to follow. Every person in my circle was either at my level or below, and we were all pulling each other down. Here's what nobody tells you about self-examination. It gets worse before it gets better. The more honestly you look at yourself, the more problems you find. I started seeing patterns I'd never noticed before. I saw how I quit things when they got hard. I saw how I made commitments and then broke them. I saw how I'd blame other people for my own shortcomings. I saw how I'd start projects with enthusiasm and then let them die when the initial excitement wore off. Every single area of my life had these patterns of failure running through it like rot through wood. My health was a disaster too. I was eating whatever was convenient, not exercising, not taking care of my body because I was too busy or too tired. But the truth was, I wasn't too busy or too tired. I just didn't value myself enough to take care of myself. I was treating my body like a rental car, like it didn't matter what happened to it because it wasn't really mine. And my body was responding exactly the way you'd expect. I was overweight, out of shape, and running on coffee and stress. The hardest part wasn't seeing all these problems. The hardest part was admitting that every single one of them was my fault. Not partially my fault, not sort of my fault, completely my fault. I had made every decision that led me to where I was. I had chosen my friends. I had chosen my habits. I had chosen how to spend my time and my money. Nobody forced me to be who I'd become. I did this to myself, one poor choice at a time, over many years. You want to know what real discipline looks like? Real discipline is sitting down with a notebook and writing out every mistake you've made, every opportunity you've wasted, every person you've disappointed, every promise you've broken to yourself. Real discipline is looking at that list and not making excuses for a single item on it. Real discipline is saying, yes, I did all of this. Yes, I am responsible. Yes, I need to change. Most people never do this. Most people take their failures to the grave, still blaming someone else, still convinced they were victims of circumstance. I had wasted years. That was the truth I had to face. Years of my life where I accomplished nothing meaningful, learned nothing valuable, became no better than I was before, and those years were gone. I couldn't get them back. No amount of regret would return them to me. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. All that time, all those opportunities, all that potential, just wasted because I was too comfortable, too lazy, too scared to do what I needed to do. But here's what I learned from that pain. Regret can either destroy you or fuel you. You can sit in your regret and let it turn into bitterness, or you can use it as motivation to make sure you never waste another day. I chose the second option. I looked at all those wasted years and I said, never again. I will never again drift through life. I will never again let comfort steal my future. I will never again be the reason I don't succeed. The breaking process meant I had to identify exactly which parts of me needed to die. This wasn't about becoming a completely different person. This was about figuring out which habits, which beliefs, which behaviors were keeping me from becoming who I was meant to be. So I made another list. On one side, I wrote down everything about myself that was working. On the other side, I wrote down everything that needed to go. The second list was a lot longer than the first. I had to break my morning routine, getting up late, rushing, starting the day already behind. That had to die. I had to break my eating habits. Fast food, junk food, eating my emotions. That had to die. I had to break my spending habits. Impulse buying, trying to impress people who didn't care, spending money before I earned it, that had to die. I had to break my entertainment habits. Hours of mindless television, scrolling through social media, consuming content that added no value to my life, that had to die. Most painful of all, I had to break some of my relationships. There were people in my life who didn't want me to change. They liked me the way I was because it made them feel better about staying the way they were. When I started reading books, they made fun of me. When I started setting goals, they told me I was getting too serious. When I started talking about my dreams, they reminded me of all the reasons I'd fail. These were people I'd known for years, people I cared about, and I had to make a choice. Their comfort or my future. Let me tell you something about that choice. It's lonely. When you start breaking yourself to rebuild yourself, you're going to lose people. They're going to think you've changed, and they're going to mean it as an insult. You're not the same person anymore, they'll say. And you'll have to smile and say, thank you, that's exactly the point. But in the moment, when you're losing friends, when people are talking about you, when you're eating lunch alone because you're not complaining with the complainers anymore, it hurts. The loneliness of transformation is real, and most people can't handle it. That's why most people never transform. They'd rather be comfortable and surrounded by familiar faces than be growing and standing alone. But here's what I discovered. When you're willing to stand alone for a while, when you're willing to be lonely in pursuit of becoming better, you eventually attract different people, better people, people who are also growing, also learning, also refusing to settle. But first you've got to be willing to walk alone. I started reading books for the first time in my adult life, not because someone made me, but because I wanted to. I realized that everything I needed to know, someone had already figured out and written down. Success leaves clues, failure leaves clues. And all of it is sitting in books waiting for someone to pick them up and learn. So I started reading everything I could get my hands on about success, about finance, about personal development, about philosophy. And every book I read showed me more clearly how little I knew and how much I needed to change. The books cost money, and I didn't have much money. But here's what I learned. You've got to invest in yourself first, not after you have extra money, not after everything else is taken care of. First, before the entertainment, before the eating out, before the comfort purchases, you invest in yourself. So I started budgeting money for books the same way I budgeted money for rent. It wasn't optional. It was essential. And that investment started paying dividends immediately. Every book gave me new ideas. Every book challenged my old thinking. Every book showed me a different way of looking at things. I started to realize that my biggest problem wasn't my circumstances. My biggest problem was my thinking. I thought like a poor person, so I stayed poor. I thought like an unsuccessful person, so I stayed unsuccessful. The book started changing my thinking, and when my thinking changed, my actions changed, and when my actions changed, my results started to change. But reading wasn't enough. I needed mentors. I needed to be around people who were already where I wanted to go. So I started seeking them out. I went to seminars. I joined organizations. I volunteered for opportunities just to be in the same room as successful people. And I watched them. I listened to them. I studied how they talked, how they thought, how they made decisions. And I started modeling myself after them instead of modeling myself after the people who were stuck. This cost money too. Seminars aren't free. Joining organizations has membership fees, but again, I made it a priority. I cut expenses in other areas so I could afford to invest in my education. I stopped eating out. I stopped buying things I didn't need. I drove an old car. I lived in a modest apartment. And I put every extra dollar into books, courses, seminars, anything that would help me grow. People thought I was crazy. They thought I was being too extreme. But I knew something they didn't know. You can't out-earn your personal development. Here's the truth about breaking yourself. It requires you to break your certainties. I had been certain about so many things that turned out to be wrong. I had been certain that success was about luck. Wrong. I had been certain that I couldn't change. Wrong. I had been certain that my past determined my future. Wrong. Every certainty I held had to be questioned, examined, and most of them had to be thrown out. That's uncomfortable because certainty feels safe. We like knowing things, even if what we know is holding us back. I also had to break my ego. My ego wanted to protect me from looking foolish. My ego didn't want to admit I'd been wrong all these years. My ego wanted to save face, to make excuses, to justify my failures, but my ego was killing me, so I had to kill it first. I had to be willing to look foolish while I learned new things. I had to be willing to admit I didn't know what I thought I knew. I had to be willing to be a beginner again and my ego hated every minute of it. The breaking process also meant breaking my need for approval. I had spent so much of my life trying to please other people, trying to fit in, trying to be liked, and all it got me was a life that wasn't mine. I was living according to other people's expectations, other people's definitions of success, other people's timeline, no more. I had to break that need for approval and start living according to my own values, my own goals, my own vision for my life. And let me tell you, when you stop seeking approval, you find freedom. Once you've done the hard work of breaking yourself down, once you've faced the truth and cleared away all the garbage, now comes the exciting part, now comes the rebuilding. And let me tell you, this is where you get to be the architect of your own life. Not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society says you should be, but who you genuinely want to be. I started with my philosophy. See, most people don't have a philosophy. They have opinions, sure, they have reactions, but they don't have a set of principles they live by. So I sat down and I asked myself, what do I believe about life? What do I believe about success? What do I believe about money, about relationships, about health, about character? And I started writing it down. This became my foundation. Every decision I made from that point forward had to align with this philosophy. If it didn't align, I didn't do it. Simple as that. Then I started building disciplines. Not all at once, because that's a recipe for failure. One discipline at a time. I started with my morning. I decided I was going to get up at the same time every single day, no excuses. And I was going to spend the first hour of my day reading and thinking, not reacting to the world, not checking messages, not rushing into the chaos. Just me, a book, and my thoughts. That one discipline changed everything because it changed how I started every day. From there, I added more disciplines. I disciplined my eating. I disciplined my spending. I disciplined my time. Each discipline was a brick in the foundation of the new me. And here's what I learned. Discipline is nothing more than making small promises to yourself and keeping them. That's it. You promise yourself you'll get up at 6 and you do it. You promise yourself you'll read for 30 minutes and you do it. You promise yourself you'll save 10% of your income and you do it. Every kept promise builds trust with yourself. Every broken promise destroys it. Your income will rarely exceed your personal development. That's a fact. If you want to earn more, you've got to become more. Not work more hours necessarily. Become more valuable. Become more skilled. Become more disciplined. Become more knowledgeable. The marketplace pays for value. And if you're not earning what you want to earn, it's because you haven't made yourself valuable enough yet. That's not an insult. That's just reality. And reality is your friend because once you accept it, you can work with it. So I started developing myself intentionally. I learned new skills. I studied successful people. I practiced communication. I worked on my attitude. I invested in my health. Every area of my life became a project, and I became the contractor. I wasn't waiting for someone to fix me or develop me or make me better. I took complete responsibility for my own growth, and that responsibility set me free. Now, here's what you need to understand about rebuilding. You're not trying to become a better version of your old self. You're creating an entirely new person. That's the difference between renovation and transformation. Renovation is taking what you have and making it a little better. Transformation is tearing down the old structure and building something completely different on the same foundation, and that's what we're after here. The new you doesn't think like the old you. The new you doesn't react like the old you. The new you doesn't make decisions like the old you. When I finished rebuilding myself, I looked back at who I used to be and I barely recognized that person. The old me would sleep in and make excuses. The new me gets up early and gets to work. The old me would spend money on anything that felt good in the moment. The new me invests money and watches it grow. The old me avoided difficult conversations. The new me walks straight into them because that's where growth happens. But the rebuilding never truly ends, and you need to know that going in. This isn't something you do once and you're done. This is a lifestyle. This is a commitment to constant refinement, constant improvement, constant growth. Every single day, you're building yourself. Every single day, you're either getting better or getting worse. There's no standing still. Life doesn't work that way. You're either growing or you're dying, and you get to choose which one. I learned that the rebuilt version of yourself handles adversity completely differently than before. When problems come up now, and they will, I don't fall apart like I used to. I don't blame other people like I used to. I don't feel sorry for myself like I used to. Instead, I ask myself, what can I learn from this? How can I use this? What is this situation trying to teach me? That shift in perspective, that shift in how you respond to difficulty, that's how you know the rebuilding is working. Let me tell you about a time when this was tested. A few years after I started rebuilding myself, I lost a major business deal. The old me would have been devastated. The old me would have blamed the other person, blamed the timing, blamed the economy. The old me would have given up and gone back to playing it safe. But the new me looked at that situation and said, what did I miss? Where could I have done better? What can I learn from this so it never happens again? And you know what? That failure taught me more than most of my successes ever did, because I was different, because I had rebuilt myself into someone who could extract value from difficulty. Here's something else that happens when you rebuild yourself. You become an example whether you want to or not. People notice. They see you changing. They see you growing. They see you succeeding, and they start asking questions. They want to know what you're doing differently. They want to know how you changed. And this is where you have a responsibility. You can't rebuild yourself and then pull the ladder up behind you. You've got to help other people. You've got to share what you've learned. Not in an arrogant way, not in a look how great I am way, but in a genuine, caring, here's what worked for me way. I've spent years now helping other people rebuild themselves. And I can tell you this, the sweetest success is the success that comes after you've been broken. Because you know what it cost. You know what you sacrificed. You know how hard you worked. You know how many times you wanted to quit. You know how many people told you it wouldn't work. And when you finally achieve what you set out to achieve, when you finally become who you set out to become, there's a satisfaction there that people who never struggled will never understand. There's a difference between confidence and cockiness. And the rebuilt version of yourself needs to know that difference. Confidence comes from competence. Confidence comes from doing the work, keeping your promises, achieving your goals. Cockiness comes from ego. Cockiness comes from thinking you're better than other people. The new you should be confident in your abilities because you've earned that confidence. But the new you should also remain humble because you remember where you came from. You remember who you used to be. You remember that without that decision to break yourself and rebuild, you'd still be that person. Success after rebuilding is sweeter, yes, but it also comes with weight. It comes with responsibility. It comes with the knowledge that you can't go back to who you were. You've burned those bridges. You've killed that old version of yourself, and good riddance. But now you have to live as this new person every single day. You have to maintain these disciplines. You have to keep these standards. You have to continue growing, because the moment you stop, the moment you get comfortable again, that's the moment you start dying again. The truth is, breaking yourself to rebuild yourself is the beginning of your real life. Everything before that was just preparation, just lessons about what not to do. But the actual living, the actual achieving, the actual becoming, that starts when you make the decision to tear down the old and build the new. And let me tell you something, that decision is available to you right now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when conditions are perfect. Right now. You can decide today that the old you is done, finished, over. You can decide today that you're going to start building something better. The question is, will you? Will you do what needs to be done, or will you keep making excuses? Will you break yourself on purpose, or will you wait for life to break you by accident? That choice, my friend, that choice is yours.